Part 1. The contract. Subin stood there in the doorway, staring at the man who had just signed their marriage contract. The room felt unnervingly quiet, the weight of the paper between them heavier than the tension in the air. She could feel her heart beating faster with every second, but Yoon didn't seem to notice. He was too busy adjusting his tie, not even sparing her a glance. They were supposed to be husband and wife, but the reality of their marriage felt like an illusion. A fake, contractual arrangement built on lies, with no love or affection. And yet, Subin was here, standing in the middle of a house that was supposed to be her home, with a man who was nothing more than a stranger to her. They weren't partners, they were two people bound by a paper, forced to live in the same space, but never truly sharing anything. Yoon finally turned to her, his expression unreadable, and handed her the paper. "Sign it," he said curtly, his voice flat and emotionless. "There's nothing more to say." Subin looked at the contract. It was simple, really. Just a series of clauses that dictated their behavior over the next year. They would live as a married couple, but they wouldn't act like one. There would be no love, no intimacy. The whole arrangement was a facade, just a way to meet family expectations and avoid the public fallout of a broken engagement. The idea of living like this for an entire year made Subin's stomach churn. But then, she thought about her family. Her parents, her friends, how they would react if they found out the truth. They'd never understand. They'd never accept that she was sacrificing her happiness for the sake of appearances. A sudden surge of frustration bubbled up inside her. "This is insane," she muttered under her breath. "What?" Yoon asked, raising an eyebrow, clearly not caring enough to ask further. "You signed, right?" Her fingers hovered over the pen, and in that moment, Subin realized something. She had the power to control this. To make this work, at least to some extent. But she couldn't just follow the rules without question. She couldn't let him think she was just going to roll over and play along. "No," Subin said, shaking her head and tossing the contract back on the table. "I can't do this without a few changes." Yoon stared at her, his expression cold. "What are you talking about?" Subin squared her shoulders, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. "We can't just pretend to be a married couple. If we're going to do this, we need some ground rules, something that makes this feel real." Yoon let out a soft laugh, the sound bordering on disbelief. "You're serious?" "I am," Subin said, her voice growing firmer. "If we're going to live together, we need to make it believable. We can't just go through the motions. I won't live in this house and pretend nothing's happening. There needs to be affection. At least in public." "Don't you care what people think?" Yoon remained silent for a long time, and Subin watched him carefully. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that told her he might not be as indifferent as he appeared. But it was gone before she could understand it. Finally, Yoon broke the silence. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with annoyance. "But don't expect me to play along with your silly games. I'll do what I have to in front of others, but this," he gestured between them, "this isn't real. We're not a couple, and we never will be." Subin felt her stomach twist. His words were like a slap in the face, but she had expected as much. He'd never seen her as anything more than a business arrangement. And that was all she would ever be to him. But the thought of living in this house, day in and day out, knowing that she was nothing to him, it made her blood boil. She couldn't just accept this, could she? There had to be a way to make him see her as more than just a name on a piece of paper. Before she could voice her thoughts, Yoon interrupted. "The deal is simple. No touching, no affection. We live like strangers. You're in your room, and I'm in mine. If we need to pretend for family, we do it. But otherwise, don't expect anything from me." Subin's chest tightened. "And if I don't agree to that? What then?" Yoon's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint flashing in them. "Then this marriage ends. You're free to go, and I'm free to go. But don't think for a second that you'll get anything from me." I'm not some lovesick fool. She could feel the challenge in his words. But she wasn't one to back down. If he thought she was just going to sign away her life for nothing, he had another thing coming. I'm not asking for your love, Subin shot back. But I won't be treated like a stranger in my own home. If I'm going to live here with you, we'll have to set some ground rules. Or else, we'll both be miserable. Yoon let out a long, exasperated sigh. Fine. We'll talk about it later. For now, just sign the damn contract. Subin stared at the paper again, her fingers trembling. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. This wasn't just about signing a contract, it was about what she was willing to endure. What she was willing to sacrifice for the sake of her family, for the sake of appearances. But one thing was certain, she couldn't let Yoon think he had all the control. She had to fight for herself, for her dignity. And she wasn't about to let him walk all over her. She took the pen and, with a flourish, signed the paper. But in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. Part 2, living the lie. The morning after the marriage contract was signed, Subin found herself standing in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same one who had walked into this house just days before. She wasn't even the same woman who had agreed to marry Yoon, despite everything inside her screaming not to. She was caught in an arrangement, a deal built on a lie. And she had no idea how she was going to make it work. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. She'd promised herself that she wouldn't let this marriage swallow her whole. That she would fight for some semblance of control in this fake union. But the reality of it all was hitting harder than she'd expected. The house was eerily quiet when she stepped downstairs, but it wasn't an unfamiliar silence. Yoon was already at the breakfast table, his eyes glued to the newspaper as he sipped his coffee. He didn't even look up when she walked in. Subin swallowed the knot in her throat, trying to keep her emotions in check. This wasn't the time for a confrontation. This was about surviving. About playing the game he had already set the rules for. She grabbed a mug from the cabinet and poured herself a cup of coffee. The warmth of the drink did little to ease the tension building in her chest. She had no idea how to go about this, how to play along with his cold, calculated version of a marriage. She sat down at the table across from him, silently nursing her coffee. The morning routine felt strange, as if everything she had known about marriage, relationships, and love had been turned upside down. They sat in the same room, but it felt like they were in different worlds entirely. Yoon finally set his newspaper down and glanced at her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if noticing her discomfort. What's wrong? Subin couldn't help the slight frustration that bubbled up. How was it that he could be so detached? So unbothered by the situation? Nothing, she said, keeping her voice steady. Just thinking. Thinking about what? His tone was flat, not even a hint of curiosity in his voice. Her hands gripped the mug tightly, her knuckles turning white. How exactly are we supposed to do this? She asked, her voice breaking slightly despite her efforts to sound calm. You and I pretending to be a married couple. How are we supposed to make this work, Yoon? Yoon sighed, rubbing his temple as if her question was a nuisance. We don't make it work. We just follow the rules. That's all there is to it. Subin couldn't believe what she was hearing. So, that's it? You just want to go through the motions? For a whole year? Yoon looked at her, his eyes cold and distant. What else is there to do? We're not in love. You knew what this was when you signed the contract. Subin felt her heart drop. He was right, but the sharpness of his words stung. She had known what she was getting into, but hearing him say it out loud made it all too real. So that's it, she repeated, her voice quiet. We just live separate lives under one roof and pretend to be a family when it's convenient for everyone else. Yoon didn't answer her right away. Instead, he took another sip of his coffee, clearly uninterested in her feelings. Pretty much. It's what we agreed to. No affection, no emotions. Just a contract. Subin's chest tightened. She couldn't let this be the end of the conversation. She had to do something. She had to make it feel like a real marriage, or else she would lose herself in this emptiness. What if we tried, she said carefully, to at least act like we're a couple? I'm not talking about real feelings. Just pretending. So people don't start asking questions. We have to do this right, or they'll figure it out. Yun's eyes flickered with some unreadable emotion before he returned to his usual detached demeanor. You can pretend all you want. But I won't. Don't expect me to play along with any of this nonsense. Subin's heart sank, but she wasn't ready to give up just yet. Please, she said, her voice quieter now, for a year. Just for a year, Yun. It can't hurt. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second, but it was gone too quickly for Subin to hold on to it. Fine, he said sharply. We'll do whatever it takes for appearances. But don't expect anything beyond that. Subin nodded, relieved yet still nervous. This wasn't going to be easy, and she knew it. But she had to try. For herself, for her family, and maybe, just maybe, there was a sliver of hope left for something more. The following days passed in a strange blur. Yun was distant as ever, following the cold rules of their marriage with precision. There were no real conversations, no glances exchanged that held any warmth. Everything felt mechanical. But Subin wasn't willing to just give up. If she had to pretend, she would do it well. Every day, she tried to find small ways to bridge the gap between them, whether it was offering a smile when they passed each other in the hallway, or making small talk over dinner. It was all surface level, but it was all she could do. One afternoon, Yun told her that they needed to attend a family event, something that was part of his family's tradition. It was a gathering that all married couples were expected to attend, a public show of unity. He didn't ask if she wanted to go. It was simply understood that it was a part of the contract. Subin, still feeling out of place in her own marriage, followed him without complaint. When they arrived at the event, she could feel the eyes of the family on them. They weren't just guests, they were the married couple. The center of attention. Yun's family treated them like any other married couple, with smiles and compliments. His mother fawned over Subin, trying to make her feel comfortable, while his father observed them both with a critical eye. His sister, on the other hand, barely acknowledged them, her attention focused elsewhere. Subin tried her best to play her part. She smiled, laughed when appropriate, and even held Yun's hand when someone asked about their relationship. But inside, it felt like she was drowning. She could barely look at him without remembering the harsh words he had spoken when they first set the rules of their marriage. When they finally left, Yun's mood was as indifferent as ever. He didn't comment on the event or how well they had performed as a couple. Ready for the next part of this charade? He asked, not even looking at her as they made their way to the car. Subin's lips twisted into a tight smile. She couldn't answer him, not yet. But she knew one thing, this act was far from over. Part 3, Cracks in the Facade. Subin couldn't shake the feeling of being a ghost in her own life. As the days passed, the lines between pretense and reality began to blur. It was as if she were trapped in a theater production, playing the role of a loving wife, while in truth, the marriage was nothing but a contract. A cold, detached arrangement with no emotional investment. The house had grown quieter in the past week. Yun's presence was almost distant, like he was a shadow lurking in the background, only stepping into the light when absolutely necessary. He came home every evening at the usual time, as expected. They would share dinner, sometimes with words, sometimes in silence. The conversation never strayed beyond polite pleasantries. It was as if they were strangers, merely playing their parts for the sake of appearances. At first, Subin had been determined to make the best of this strange situation. She had hoped, in her heart of hearts, that something, anything, might develop between them. That they might find a rhythm, or at least a friendship, if nothing else. But after the family gathering, her hopes began to crumble. The cracks in their arrangement were becoming too evident, and she was starting to question her own sanity. She sat on the edge of their bed one evening, staring at the untouched space beside her. She didn't know what was more unsettling, the absence of intimacy, or the fact that Yun seemed perfectly content without it. He had never once sought her out, not even for a simple conversation. Every time they passed each other in the hallway, it felt like they were mere strangers who shared the same roof. Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend, Harry. Subin smiled faintly, grateful for some kind of connection outside of her new, empty life. "Harry, how's the married life? How's Mr. Ice King?" Subin chuckled softly, typing back a reply. "Subin, it's fine. Quiet. He's just as distant as everyone warned me." "Harry, you're kidding. Is there at least some kind of conversation? You guys don't even pretend to be normal?" Subin hesitated. She could already hear Harry's voice in her head, full of concern and disbelief. "Subin, I mean, we talk. Just not much. More like business than anything else." Harry's reply came quickly. "Harry, this is crazy. He can't just act like a robot forever. If you want this to work, even if it's fake, you need to get through to him. Otherwise, it'll feel like you're living with a stranger for a whole year." Subin let out a soft sigh, running a hand through her hair. Harry wasn't wrong. But how could she get through to Yun when he refused to even acknowledge her presence outside of the basic necessities? Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her mother. "Mom, Subin, we're having a family gathering this weekend. You and Yun should come by. It's been a while since we all saw each other." Subin froze, her fingers hovering over the screen. Another family event. Another reminder that this marriage, this charade, wasn't just a private affair between two people. It was something that everyone was watching. Everyone was expecting them to act the part. Her mind raced. She could feel her anxiety creeping in, the pressure of having to maintain this facade, knowing that every move she made was being observed by prying eyes. She glanced at the clock. Yun would be home soon. The dread in her chest started to build as she thought about how to approach him with this request. How could she ask him to attend another one of these family events? Would he even care enough to pretend with her? The door clicked open just then, and Yun entered, shedding his coat as he glanced over at her. "Dinner's ready," Subin said, trying to sound casual, though her heart was pounding in her chest. Yun didn't immediately respond. Instead, he took a seat at the dining table without so much as a glance in her direction. Subin exhaled, then followed him to the table. The silence between them felt heavier than usual tonight. The minutes ticked by, each second stretching longer than the last. Subin had never realized how suffocating silence could be. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of unspoken words pressing on her chest. Finally, she took a deep breath and broke the silence. "Yun, my mom's hosting a family gathering this weekend. She's invited us." Yun didn't look up from his plate. Subin's stomach churned with frustration. Why was this so difficult? Why couldn't he even pretend to care? "You're not even going to ask about it?" she asked, her voice tight. "It's important to me that we attend. If you really want people to believe we're married, we need to make an effort. You can't just shut everything out like this." Yun's eyes met hers briefly, his gaze cold and unreadable. He didn't speak for a moment, making Subin wonder if he would even respond at all. Then, finally, he shrugged. "Fine. We'll go. But don't expect anything more than that." The words stung, but she couldn't let it show. He had agreed, begrudgingly, but still, he had agreed. She had to focus on the small victories, even if they were only temporary. The days leading up to the weekend felt like an eternity. Subin found herself rehearsing what to say, how to act, even what to wear. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about playing her role perfectly. If she could just manage to convince everyone that she and Yun were a real couple, that they were happy, maybe she could hold on to some sense of normalcy. But even as she prepared for the weekend, something began to shift inside her. The cracks in the facade were starting to show. She couldn't ignore the growing sense of emptiness inside her. It wasn't just the marriage that felt hollow, it was her entire life. Her dreams, her hopes, all seemed so distant now. When the weekend arrived, Subin could barely hold her composure as she dressed for the gathering. She chose a simple yet elegant dress, hoping it would convey a sense of warmth and grace. She wanted to feel confident, to look the part of a happy wife, even if it was just for a few hours. Yoon didn't comment on her appearance when she entered the living room, his eyes flickering over her before he turned his attention to the door. "Let's go," he said, his tone still as detached as ever. Subin nodded, her heart beating in her throat. This was it. The next test. She had to keep pretending, even if it felt like it was eating her alive. They arrived at her mother's house in silence, and as expected, the moment they entered, all eyes were on them. The usual greeting, the fake smiles. Subin could feel herself slipping into her role once again, the mask falling into place. But inside, the loneliness was becoming unbearable. Yoon, for his part, played the part of a husband just well enough to avoid suspicion. He sat beside her, engaging in small talk when necessary but otherwise remaining distant. Subin noticed her mother watching them carefully, as if trying to figure out if something was amiss. Then, as the evening wore on, something strange happened. As the conversations flowed around them, Subin caught Yoon's gaze from across the room. There was a brief flicker of something in his eyes, a moment of vulnerability, something he had never allowed to show before. And just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. But in that brief moment, Subin's heart skipped a beat. For the first time since their agreement, she felt something shift. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her wonder, was there more to this marriage than she had realized? Part 4. Unspoken words. The family gathering had been a quiet affair, but Subin couldn't get the flicker of something in Yoon's eyes out of her mind. It was strange, there had been no change in his behavior, no grand gestures. And yet, something had shifted. The silence between them was still as thick as ever, but now, there was a new layer to it. Something unspoken. Subin couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one playing a part in this marriage. As the week went on, the brief exchange at her mother's house lingered in her thoughts. She tried to dismiss it. After all, they were still living in the same uncomfortable routine. Yoon came and went without much fanfare. Their conversations were still awkward and devoid of any real connection. The marriage was still as fake as it had ever been. But that lingering moment kept pulling at her. Could there be more to Yoon than the cold, distant figure he presented to the world? Could he be hiding something beneath that icy exterior? Subin found herself questioning everything. If there was something there, was it worth pursuing? Or was she just setting herself up for more disappointment? She pushed the thoughts aside as she went about her day. It was easier to focus on the mundane, the tasks she had to complete. She worked from home, handling the few projects she had left before her company's restructuring. She didn't have the luxury of focusing too much on her feelings. There were bills to pay, emails to send, and family obligations to honor. It wasn't until Thursday evening, when Yin came home late, that things started to feel different again. Subin had just finished dinner when she heard the door click open. Yun's footsteps echoed in the hallway as he made his way to the kitchen. He wasn't as quiet as usual, there was something in his walk, a weight to his steps that felt off. She glanced up as he entered, his face a little more drawn than usual, his eyes tired. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at her, as if trying to decide whether or not to say something. "Are you okay?" Subin asked before she could stop herself. Yoon paused, then nodded stiffly. "I'm fine. Just, work." Subin wasn't convinced. He had never been this withdrawn before. His tone was clipped, his body language tense. She could feel it in the air, the same invisible wall that had always existed between them was getting higher, thicker. "I don't think you're fine," she said quietly, her voice softer now. "You don't have to pretend with me, Yoon. You know that, right?" His eyes flickered, but he quickly masked it with a tight smile. I'm not pretending, Subin. Just tired. But there was something in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. A vulnerability, maybe. Or was it frustration? It was hard to tell. Subin took a deep breath. She didn't know why she was pushing him. She had always kept her distance, never asking for more than what he was willing to give. But tonight felt different. She wanted to break through that wall, just for a moment. Is there something going on? She asked, her heart pounding in her chest. You don't have to tell me everything, but I don't want us to just be strangers living in the same house. Yun's gaze flickered again, and for a second, he looked like he might say something. But instead, he just shook his head. It's nothing. Subin wasn't sure if she believed him. She wanted to press further, but something inside her told her that pushing him too hard would only make things worse. She had learned that much over the past few months. If she pushed too much, he would pull away completely. So, she did the only thing she could think of, she let it go. For now. All right, she said softly. I'll leave you to it then. Yun gave a short nod and walked away, disappearing into their bedroom without another word. Subin stared after him, feeling that familiar ache in her chest. She didn't want to feel like this anymore. She didn't want to keep playing pretend. But there was a part of her, maybe the same part that had been clinging to hope for so long, that still believed something could change. The next few days followed the same pattern. Subin tried to focus on her work, to distract herself from the tension in the house. She hadn't been able to shake the feeling that Yun was hiding something from her. He had become more distant than usual, and she couldn't figure out why. It wasn't just the usual coldness, there was something deeper, something raw and unsettling. By Friday afternoon, the air in the house felt suffocating. Subin couldn't sit still anymore. She had to confront Yun. If something was going on, if there was a reason he was acting this way, she deserved to know. She had to know if she was living in a marriage of convenience or if there was still a chance for something more. That evening, as she prepared dinner, she heard him arrive home, the sound of his footsteps heavy as he walked through the front door. He didn't say anything right away, and Subin was on the edge of losing her patience. This time, she wouldn't let him hide. She would make him talk. Yun, she called out, her voice steady but firm. He stopped in his tracks, turning to face her. His eyes were guarded, but there was something different about the way he looked at her this time. Maybe it was the way his shoulders were hunched, as if he were carrying a weight, or the fact that he didn't immediately retreat into the walls he had built around himself. Subin took a deep breath. I need to know what's going on with you. I can't keep living like this, in this silence. If something's wrong, you need to tell me. There was a long pause, and for a moment, she wondered if he would shut her down again. But instead, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Yun began, but he trailed off, looking away. I don't know how to explain it. Subin's heart skipped a beat. You don't have to explain everything. Just, tell me what's going on. Yun was silent for a long time. Subin could feel the tension thick in the air as they both stood there, neither of them moving. She wasn't sure what she expected, but she felt like she was standing on the edge of something. A cliff. A precipice. And then, finally, Yun spoke. His voice was low, almost too quiet to hear. I didn't want this, not like this. The words hung in the air, and for the first time since they'd started this marriage, Subin felt like she had finally cracked through to him. Part 5, the cracks began to show. Subin stood there, frozen, as Yun's words echoed in her mind. I didn't want this, not like this. It felt like time had slowed down, each second dragging out as she tried to process what he had just said. She had always known that their marriage wasn't built on love, but to hear Yun admit, even indirectly, that he hadn't wanted this life with her, well, it was a different kind of pain. A sharp, raw kind that twisted inside her chest. She opened her mouth, but for a moment, no words came out. What could she say to that? How could she even respond when she didn't know what exactly Yoon meant? Was it just about the marriage, or was there something more? Yoon, as if sensing her hesitation, shifted uncomfortably. It's not what you think, he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Subin swallowed hard, trying to calm the storm of emotions brewing inside her. Then tell me what it is, Yoon. Tell me what you mean. He hesitated again, his eyes flickering with something unreadable before he stepped closer to her, lowering his voice as if afraid someone might overhear. I never wanted this fake marriage to last. I never wanted to live this lie. Subin's heart skipped a beat. She was trying to make sense of his words, but everything felt like a blur. You don't want this marriage? So why did you agree to it in the first place? Yoon ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. I had no choice. You know that. My family, your family, they all had expectations. I didn't have a say in any of it. She nodded, a bitter taste rising in her throat. It was true. Their families had practically arranged this marriage for them. It wasn't like they'd gotten to know each other before the wedding. It was more like they were thrown into this union without asking for any of it. But hearing Yoon say it out loud felt different. There was an honesty to his admission that struck a chord with her. It made her wonder if maybe he hadn't been as indifferent to the situation as she had thought. Subin took a step back, her mind racing. So, you've always been unhappy with this marriage? Yoon's face darkened. It's not that simple, Subin. It's just complicated. I've been trying to deal with it, but, his words faltered, and he looked away, clenching his jaw. But I've never been good at pretending. Not like you. Her stomach tightened at his words, and she felt her face flush with a mix of anger and hurt. Pretending? Was that what he thought of her? That she had somehow been playing along with the idea of a real marriage while all along, she had known it was a farce? I'm not pretending, Subin said quietly, her voice shaking. I've tried to make the best of it. For both of us. But it's not just about pretending. It's about survival. Yoon's eyes softened for the briefest moment. I didn't mean it like that. Subin looked at him, her chest heavy. She had tried, really tried, to understand him, to make this work in whatever strange way it could. But hearing him speak about their marriage in such a dismissive way, like it was a burden, something he was forced into, made the cracks in their relationship more obvious. Maybe it had always been like this. Maybe they had never really been on the same page. You've never really tried, Yoon, she whispered. You've been shutting me out from the beginning. I've been living with this silence, this emptiness, waiting for something, anything, to change. But nothing ever does. He winced at her words, his face falling. I didn't want to hurt you. I know, she replied, blinking back tears she hadn't realized were threatening to fall. But the hurt doesn't go away, Yoon. It just builds up. And now? I don't know what's left. There was a long, uncomfortable silence between them. The words were out in the open now, the truth of their feelings hanging heavily in the air. Yoon looked like he wanted to say something more, but he just stood there, frozen in place, his expression unreadable. It was as if he was searching for the right thing to say, but couldn't find it. Subin took another deep breath, trying to steady herself. I can't keep doing this. This pretending. It's too much. I need more than just two people living in the same house, sharing nothing but space. Yoon opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, there was a soft knock at the door. Both of them turned in surprise, the tension between them momentarily broken. Subin frowned, the interruption pulling her out of the moment. Who is it? The door cracked open just a little, revealing her mother's face. Subin, I hope I'm not interrupting anything. But your father wants to talk to you. Subin exchanged a glance with Yoon, who had clearly tensed at the mention of her family. She nodded slowly. I'll be right there. Her mother hesitated before leaving, giving Subin a final look that was hard to read. Was she aware of the tension in the room? Did she suspect something was wrong? I'll go with you, Yoon said abruptly, his voice strained. Subin gave him a confused look. Why? I'm just going to speak with my father. Yoon's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something more vulnerable than usual. I don't know. Maybe we can talk more later. When it's just the two of us. Subin felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name at the thought of having a real conversation with Yoon. A conversation that wasn't just about the marriage, but about everything else, the unsaid words, the things that had been buried beneath the surface. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would slip through her fingers if she wasn't careful. There were too many unanswered questions between them, too much left unsaid. All right, Subin said, nodding slowly. Let's go. As they left the room, the weight of what had just happened hung heavily between them. Subin didn't know what would happen after tonight. She didn't know if Yoon was ready to open up or if she had just forced him into a corner. All she knew was that things couldn't stay the same. Something had to change. But as they walked down the hallway to her father's study, she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers they both needed were just out of reach. Part 6. Unspoken tension. Subin's father's study was always a place of authority, the heavy wooden door creaking open to reveal an air of formality that made Subin's heart beat faster. She had always felt a slight unease in this room, perhaps because of her father's unyielding expectations and the weight of his presence. Tonight, it felt even heavier. Yoon walked beside her, his posture rigid, like he was preparing for something serious. She could feel his unease as well. The tension between them was almost palpable, like an invisible thread pulling them together and apart at the same time. When they entered the room, her father was sitting behind his massive oak desk, papers scattered before him. He looked up with a calm expression, but there was something about his gaze that made Subin's chest tighten. Subin. Yoon. Her father's voice was as measured as ever. Please, sit down. Yoon moved toward one of the chairs, his movements slow and deliberate. Subin followed suit, but she didn't feel the usual sense of calm that the study often instilled in her. Tonight, there was too much unspoken between her and Yoon, and the weight of her father's presence made it even more suffocating. Is something wrong, father? Subin asked, her voice betraying the tension she felt. Her father's gaze flickered briefly to Yoon before settling back on her. There are things we need to discuss, important matters. Your marriage, for one. Subin's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the first time her father had brought up their marriage, but the seriousness in his tone made her worry. She exchanged a brief glance with Yoon, who remained silent, his face unreadable. What about it? Subin asked, trying to sound casual, though her pulse was racing. Her father steepled his fingers, his eyes narrowing slightly. You've been married for a while now, Subin. But I've noticed that things have been less than ideal. The family is starting to ask questions. The word stung. Subin knew their marriage had never been perfect, but hearing her father voice his concern out loud felt like a punch to the gut. She couldn't help but look at Yoon, hoping for some sign of support, but he was focused on her father, not her. He was quiet, his expression distant. What do you mean, father? Subin asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Her father leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Your relationship with Yoon, it's not convincing anyone. You're both distant, and there's too much tension. It's affecting our reputation. People are starting to talk, Subin. Subin felt her stomach twist. She had always known that appearances mattered to her father, but she hadn't realized just how much their private struggles were being scrutinized. She could feel the weight of his expectations bearing down on her, but she couldn't bring herself to admit how much she was struggling with everything. Is that why you're concerned? Subin asked, her voice tinged with frustration. Because people are talking? Her father's expression hardened slightly. It's not just about appearances, Subin. It's about the future of this family. The business. The legacy. Subin clenched her fists in her lap. She knew how much the family's business meant to her father. He had built it from the ground up, and everything he did was for the preservation of that legacy. But sometimes, it felt like that was all that mattered to him. The image. The reputation. And what do you want me to do about it? Subin asked, the words coming out harsher than she intended. Her father paused, clearly sensing the frustration in her voice. I want you to fix this. I don't care how, but you need to repair your relationship with Yun. Start acting like a married couple. Attend social events together. Be seen in public. Show the world that this marriage isn't a mistake. Subin's mind raced. Fix this? How could she fix something that was never real to begin with? How could she pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't? She glanced at Yun again, hoping he would say something, but he remained silent, his eyes unreadable. Yun's silence spoke volumes, though. Subin could feel the weight of his unwillingness to be a part of this conversation. The distance between them was growing, and each second in her father's study felt like another wall being built between them. I can't just act like everything is perfect when it's not, Subin said quietly, her voice almost breaking. This marriage, it's a lie. We've been pretending for so long, father, but I can't do it anymore. It's not healthy. Her father's expression darkened, and for the first time in a long while, Subin saw the anger in his eyes. You will not speak of it like that. This marriage is not a lie. It is an arrangement for the future of both of our families. You will make it work. Subin felt a lump form in her throat. She could feel her father's cold, calculated expectations pressing against her chest. He wasn't interested in her feelings or Yun's. All he cared about was the image, the reputation, and the future of the family business. I'm sorry, father, Subin said quietly, standing up from her seat. I can't do this anymore. Yun finally spoke up, his voice low and strained. Subin, wait. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. She walked toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest, but she felt Yun's hand on her arm, gently pulling her back. Let's just talk, okay, he said, his voice quieter now, a hint of desperation in his tone. Subin shook her head, trying to pull away, but his grip tightened. She turned to face him, her face flushed with frustration. Talk? Talk about what, Yun? About how we're both trapped in a marriage we never wanted? Or how we're both lying to everyone around us? Yun's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, Subin saw something real in his expression, a crack in the armor he had built around himself. Subin, he whispered, his voice pained. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I even can. Subin stared at him, her breath coming in short, shaky gasps. She wanted to scream, to break free from everything that was suffocating her. But at the same time, a part of her wanted to understand him, wanted to believe that they could find a way out of this mess together. Her father's voice cut through the moment, cold and final. Subin, I expect this to be fixed. You will go back to your role. You will fulfill your duty to this family. But Subin wasn't listening anymore. She looked at Yun, her heart heavy with uncertainty. Maybe they couldn't fix this marriage. Maybe they couldn't pretend any longer. But they could try to figure out what came next. Part 7, the breaking point. Subin didn't sleep that night. The images of her father's cold, demanding face and Yun's fragile, uncertain expression kept flashing through her mind. Her father's words were still echoing in her ears, as though they had become a permanent fixture in her thoughts. You will make it work. That phrase seemed impossible now, a cruel reminder of how far they were from any semblance of happiness. She stood by the window, looking out at the city lights below, the cool night air seeping in through the cracked window. Her thoughts were a chaotic mess, like a storm tearing through her mind. She felt suffocated by the expectations that weighed on her shoulders. Her father wanted them to act like a couple for the public, to maintain the image of a perfect marriage, but Subin knew deep down that she couldn't keep up the facade any longer. But what could she do? The idea of confronting her father again, of telling him the truth. That her marriage to Yoon had never been what he thought it was, seemed impossible. Subin had always done what was expected of her. She had followed the path laid out for her, never questioning it. But now, she was at a crossroads. She didn't know which direction to take. The sound of her phone ringing broke her thoughts. Subin glanced down at the screen, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw Yun's name flashing. She hesitated before answering. What could he possibly want now? Hadn't they just been in the middle of the worst confrontation they'd ever had? But despite her frustration, there was a part of her that was still unsure, still willing to hear him out. Yun, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady, though it trembled slightly. Subin, his voice came through, low and unsure. Can we talk? In person. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of everything pressing on her chest. She wanted to say no. She wanted to walk away from the mess, to get some space. But there was something about his voice, something that felt like a cry for help. She couldn't just shut him out. Where? She asked, her tone barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the other end before Yun's voice returned. The old park, by the lake. Meet me there in an hour. Subin felt a wave of hesitation, but she knew she couldn't avoid this conversation forever. Fine. I'll be there, she said, then ended the call quickly. The park by the lake. It was a place she hadn't visited in years. She used to go there with her friends when she was younger, a quiet, serene spot that always offered some peace. But now, it felt like the perfect metaphor for where her life was headed, stuck in a limbo, between two worlds, unable to move forward or backward. Subin arrived at the park shortly after, her breath misting in the cold night air. The place was eerily quiet, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the wind. The lake, usually calm and still, reflected the pale glow of the moon, making everything look surreal. She could see Yun standing by the water's edge, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his jacket, his posture stiff, as though he was waiting for something, waiting for her. He turned as she approached, his face unreadable. There was something in his eyes, though, something that spoke of guilt and regret. Subin stopped a few feet away from him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest to ward off the chill. For a moment, neither of them said anything. It was like the silence between them had taken on a life of its own, thick and suffocating, a wall that neither of them knew how to break. Finally, Yun spoke, his voice soft but laced with an underlying tension. Subin. I know I haven't been fair to you. I haven't been honest with you, and I don't know how to make it right. Subin swallowed, her throat tight. She wanted to yell at him, to demand the truth. Demand answers to the questions that had been eating away at her. But instead, she felt herself shrinking, the anger inside her draining away, replaced with an aching sadness. I don't understand you, Yun, she said, her voice trembling. I don't understand why you've been so distant. Why you've acted like this marriage means nothing to you. And now you're telling me you want to fix things? You want to be honest? Yun stepped closer, his expression pained. I've been afraid, Subin. Afraid of what this marriage really means. I never wanted to hurt you. But I've been pretending too, just like you. Her eyes widened slightly. Pretending? What do you mean? He hesitated before answering, his gaze fixed on the ground. I've been hiding behind this image, just like you have. Trying to fulfill everyone's expectations, even though it's been killing me inside. I never wanted this marriage, Subin. Not the way it's turned out. But I don't know how to get out of it. I don't know how to fix us. Subin felt her heart race. This wasn't what she had expected. It wasn't the confession she had been waiting for, but it was a start, an acknowledgement of the truth that neither of them had been brave enough to face. You don't know how to fix us, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Then what are we supposed to do, Yun? How do we fix something that was never real in the first place? Yun looked up at her, his eyes full of conflict. I don't know, he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. But I'm not ready to give up on us, Subin. I don't know how to make things right, but I don't want to walk away from you. I don't want to lose you. Subin's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to cry or scream or just collapse in exhaustion. There were so many emotions swirling inside her, anger, confusion, pain, and a small flicker of something she couldn't quite name. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that maybe they could still find a way out of this mess. But the fear of getting hurt again, of being disappointed again, made her pull back. I don't know if I can trust you, Yoon, Subin said, her voice shaky. You've been so distant, and now you're saying all these things. How can I believe you? Yoon took a step forward, his hand reaching out hesitantly. I know I've hurt you. And I'm sorry. I just need you to give me a chance, to give us a chance. Please. Subin looked at his outstretched hand, her heart torn. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Could she trust him again? Could she trust herself to believe in something that had always been a lie? The silence between them stretched on, heavy and thick, until Subin finally spoke, her voice barely audible. I don't know, Yoon. I just don't know anymore. Part 8, the crossroads. The following days dragged on like a slow, unrelenting tide. Subin couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with Yoon by the lake. His words echoed in her mind constantly, spinning around in a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. She wasn't sure if she was ready to forgive him, if she was willing to give him a chance. But every time she tried to move on, something inside her tugged her back, like a faint, distant hope that perhaps they could rebuild the shattered pieces of their marriage. But how? How could they rebuild something that had never truly existed in the first place? The reality of their situation hit her like a punch to the gut every time she saw her father's stern face in her mind, every time she thought of the expectations hanging over her like a dark cloud. Her father had made it clear that there was no turning back. No matter what Yoon and Subin felt, or didn't feel, they were bound by duty. They had to make it work. But Subin had never been one to simply submit to expectations. She had always struggled against the pressure, trying to forge her own path, even when it seemed impossible. But what if her own path meant leaving Yoon behind? What if it meant facing her father's wrath and walking away from the life she had always known? Could she really do that? Could she really choose herself over the life that was expected of her? Subin spent her nights wrestling with these questions. She would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart heavy with indecision. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more between her and Yoon, something buried deep under all the hurt and lies. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the fear gnawing at her. The fear that maybe she had been wrong to believe in him, that maybe he wasn't the man she had hoped he would be. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between them grew wider, even as they continued to live under the same roof. There were no more late-night talks or shared moments of quiet comfort. Instead, there was only silence. A cold, suffocating silence that wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. Subin found herself retreating more and more into herself, losing herself in her work, in her own thoughts, in the endless cycle of doubt and confusion. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was early one morning when Subin's phone rang, pulling her out of the haze of sleep. She groggily reached for the phone on her nightstand, blinking against the harsh light of the screen. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but something about it made her stomach twist with unease. Hesitantly, she answered the call. Hello? Subin, a familiar voice came through the line, but it wasn't Yoon's. It was her father's. Her heart immediately dropped into her stomach. She hadn't spoken to him in days, not since the last confrontation. She had been avoiding him, not wanting to face the anger that she knew would come with any more conversations about her marriage. What is it, father? She asked, trying to keep the edge of panic from her voice. I need to see you. Her father's voice was cold, clipped. Now. Subin's heart skipped a beat. What could he possibly want now? The weight of his request hung heavily in the air, and she could feel her pulse quickening. I'm not sure I can come right now, she stammered, glancing at the clock. It was barely 8 a.m., and she wasn't prepared for whatever he had planned. But the sternness in his voice made it clear that it wasn't a request she could refuse. I don't care about your excuses, he replied sharply. I need to talk to you. This isn't up for discussion. Subin closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. She knew there was no point in arguing. When her father made a decision, there was no changing it. He would have his way, no matter what. Where do you want to meet? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again. The office. Now. The line went dead before Subin could say anything else. She stared at the phone in her hand, her thoughts swirling in a chaotic mess. Her heart raced as she wondered what her father wanted. She could already feel the tension in her chest, a knot forming that wouldn't go away. Whatever this meeting was about, she had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to be good. She got dressed quickly, trying to shake off the sense of dread that had settled over her. She wasn't sure what awaited her, but she couldn't back down. If her father wanted something from her, she had no choice but to face him. The drive to her father's office was a blur. Subin couldn't focus on the road, her mind consumed by the thought of what was coming. Her father had never been one to show affection, and lately, his demands had grown more insistent, more controlling. What could he want from her now? When she arrived at his office, she was greeted by the usual sterile environment of the building. Shiny floors, polished walls, and the cold, impersonal atmosphere that always made her feel small. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile, but there was something in her eyes that seemed to say, "Good luck." Subin walked down the familiar hallway to her father's office, her steps echoing in the silence. The door was already open, and she could see her father standing by the large window, looking out over the city skyline. He didn't turn around when she entered. He didn't need to. His presence was commanding enough to fill the room, even without a word spoken. "Sit," he said flatly, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Subin obeyed, sitting down stiffly, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "You've been avoiding me," her father said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I don't appreciate that." "I've been busy," Subin replied, her voice a little sharper than she intended. She couldn't help it. Every time she had to face him, the frustration and resentment seemed to build up inside her. She hated the way he tried to control every aspect of her life. She hated the way he made her feel like she didn't have a choice in anything. Her father finally turned to face her, his eyes cold and calculating. "You think you have the luxury of avoiding me? You are my daughter, Subin. You will do as I say." Subin clenched her jaw, trying to keep her emotions in check. She couldn't let him see how much his words affected her. She couldn't let him break her. "What do you want, father?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Her father didn't waste any time getting to the point. "I need you to make things right with Yun," he said, his tone matter of fact. "This charade has gone on long enough. You need to put your personal feelings aside and focus on what's best for the company. You're both tied together now, whether you like it or not. And it's time for you to accept that." Subin felt a wave of anger rise in her chest, but she forced it down. "What if I don't want to accept it? What if I'm not willing to go along with your plan anymore?" Her father's eyes hardened. "Then you will be cut off. I will make sure that you and Yun have no future. I will make sure that you both suffer." The words hung in the air like a poison, and Subin felt her stomach twist. There it was, the ultimatum. Her father's grip on her life had always been tight, but now, it was suffocating. Subin stood up abruptly, her heart pounding in her chest. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. "I'm done." Her father's gaze bore into her as she turned and walked out of the office, the weight of his threats and the reality of her decision pressing down on her like never before. Part 9, the breaking point. Subin's heart raced as she left her father's office, the walls closing in around her. The oppressive silence of the elevator ride down to the ground floor felt suffocating. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The ultimatum. The cold, calculated way he had made her feel like nothing more than a pawn in his game. For the first time in years, Subin felt the weight of her choices pressing on her with unbearable force. Her father had always been demanding, but this was something else. This was a line drawn in the sand. A choice between the life she had built for herself and the life her father had planned for her. There was no middle ground. And worse yet, there was no easy way out. Her hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel on the drive home. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay in that office another minute. She needed to breathe. She needed to think. When she finally pulled into the driveway, the weight of the world seemed to land squarely on her shoulders. Yun's car was parked outside, a reminder that no matter how far she tried to run, she couldn't escape the tangled mess of their lives. The last few weeks had been filled with an awkward, painful silence between them, but even that had begun to feel unbearable. The door clicked shut behind her as she stepped into the house, the air thick with the tension that had been building for so long. Yun was in the living room, his back to her, flipping through a book. He didn't turn around when she entered, but she could feel the shift in the air. His presence was like a quiet storm, always looming, always there, just waiting for the right moment to break. Subin took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Her father's words still echoed in her mind, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she was more angry at him or at herself. "I spoke to father," she said, her voice much calmer than she felt. Yun's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't look up. "What did he say?" "Same thing as always," Subin replied, her gaze drifting to the window as she struggled to find the right words. "You and I are stuck together. Whether we like it or not." Yun finally turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "And what do you think about that?" Subin's stomach twisted. She could hear the underlying tension in his voice. The question wasn't just about her father's demands, it was about them. About what they had become, what they had been, and what they could still be. And the truth was, she didn't know the answer. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I don't know what to think anymore. I don't know what's real, and I don't know what's fake. I don't know if I can do this, Yun." Yun's eyes softened, a hint of the man she had once known breaking through the cold exterior. "I don't know if I can either." The words hung between them like fragile glass, waiting to shatter at the slightest touch. They had been dancing around this for weeks, but now it was out in the open. Neither of them knew what was next. They were trapped in a marriage that had never been a marriage at all, just a convenient arrangement to satisfy their families. And no matter how many times they tried to pretend otherwise, the truth was impossible to ignore. Subin's breath hitched as the gravity of it all sank in. "Maybe it's time to stop pretending," she whispered, the words almost foreign on her tongue. Yun stood up slowly, his face unreadable. "Stop pretending," he repeated softly, stepping toward her. "You want to end this? After everything?" Subin's heart pounded in her chest as she searched his face, looking for some sign of the man she had once loved. "I don't know what I want, Yun. I really don't. But I can't keep living like this. Not anymore." Yun stood still, his eyes darkening with emotion, but he didn't say anything. The silence between them was suffocating, the tension growing thicker with every passing second. "I'm sorry," Subin said, her voice breaking slightly. "I never wanted it to be like this. I never wanted to hurt you." Yun exhaled slowly, as if weighing her words. Then, with a small, bitter smile, he said, "I know. I never wanted this either. But here we are." The words were simple, but they held a weight that Subin could feel in her bones. The sense of finality in his tone left her breathless. There was no going back now. They had both come to the end of a road they had been walking down for far too long. "I'm going to move out," Yun said after a long pause, his voice low and steady. Subin blinked, her heart skipping a beat. "What?" "I can't keep living here," Yun continued, his gaze never wavering from hers. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. Maybe time apart will give us both some clarity. The words hit her harder than she expected. She hadn't anticipated this. She hadn't thought that Yun would be the one to walk away first. It wasn't what she wanted, and yet, in some strange way, it was exactly what they both needed. For the first time in a long time, Subin felt a rush of emotions flood over her, grief, anger, relief, and something else she couldn't quite place. She wanted to fight him. To scream that she didn't want him to go. But the truth was, deep down, she knew he was right. They needed space. They needed to figure out who they were, apart from the weight of everyone else's expectations. Are you sure? She asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Yun nodded, his eyes filled with something Subin couldn't read. Yeah. I'm sure. We've been living in this limbo for so long. I think it's time we both figure out what we really want. Subin felt the tears rise in her throat, but she swallowed them down. She wasn't ready to cry, not in front of him. Not like this. I'll start looking for a place, Yun said, his voice soft. You don't have to worry about anything. I'll figure it out. Subin nodded, though her heart felt like it was breaking in two. This wasn't how she had imagined things would end. She had hoped, somewhere deep inside, that they could make it work. But maybe they weren't meant to. Yun gave her one last, lingering look before turning to leave. But before he reached the door, he stopped and glanced back at her. Subin, he said softly, his voice almost tender, I hope you find what you're looking for. I really do. And with that, he was gone. Subin stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been. The silence that followed felt so final, so heavy. She wasn't sure if she had made the right choice, but in that moment, she knew one thing for certain, everything had changed. And there was no going back. Part 10, A New Beginning. The days that followed Yun's departure were a blur of emptiness and uncertainty. Subin found herself alone in the house they had once shared, the silence almost unbearable. It felt like the walls were closing in on her, as if the space that had once felt so familiar was now a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. She hadn't expected it to hurt this much. At first, there had been a strange sense of relief when Yun left. She had needed the space to breathe, to think, to figure out what she really wanted. But the relief quickly turned to loneliness. She missed the quiet comfort of his presence, the way his gaze would sometimes soften when he caught her watching him. She missed the little things, the way he would make coffee in the mornings, or the soft hum of his voice when they talked about nothing in particular. But the absence of those things was even harder to bear. The house felt like a shell of itself, stripped of the warmth it once held. Subin couldn't escape the constant pull of the past, the memory of the way things had been before they had gotten lost in the tangle of family obligations and personal sacrifices. She couldn't forget the way she had once looked at Yun, the way she had once believed in their future together. But now, everything felt uncertain. It wasn't just Yun's absence that weighed on her, it was the decisions she had to make. Her father's ultimatum still loomed over her like a dark cloud. She had to choose, stay in the marriage, or walk away and face the consequences. But how could she decide? How could she choose between the life she had known and the unknown future that stretched out before her like a vast, empty horizon? The nights were the hardest. That was when her mind raced, when her thoughts tangled and spiraled out of control. She found herself wondering if she had made the right choice by letting Yun go, if there had been another way to fix things. But she couldn't answer those questions, not yet. She tried to focus on work, on the things that usually brought her comfort, but even that seemed hollow. It was as though the world was moving around her, and she was stuck in place, unable to keep up. One afternoon, Subin received a message from her father. It was brief, to the point, and cold, just like him. I expect you to meet with me tomorrow. There are things that need to be discussed. The message made her stomach churn. She knew exactly what he wanted. It was the same thing he had always wanted, her to fall in line, to do what was expected of her. But how could she? How could she live the life he had planned for her when she wasn't sure who she even was anymore? The next day, Subin went to the meeting with her father, her nerves a tangle of wires. She walked into his office, trying to project the calm confidence that had once come so easily to her, but inside, she was anything but calm. Her father didn't waste any time. He got straight to the point. "You're still married," he said, his voice hard. "I don't know what your intentions are, but I expect you to resolve this issue. Your future depends on it." Subin took a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to honor your commitments," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Your marriage is a business arrangement, and it must remain that way. You will not walk away from it. Do you understand?" Subin felt a surge of anger rise up in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She had heard these words from him countless times before. But this time, something was different. This time, she wasn't the same woman who had blindly followed his commands. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "But I also need to make my own decisions. I can't keep living my life the way you want me to." Her father's face hardened, and for a moment, he looked like the man who had controlled every aspect of her life for so long. "You'll regret this," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. But Subin stood her ground. "Maybe I will. But I'm not going to live my life for you anymore." There was a long silence, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. Her father's gaze held hers, and in that moment, Subin realized something: she was no longer afraid of him. She had spent so many years living in his shadow, but she had outgrown that fear. She had a life of her own now. A life that wasn't defined by his expectations. Her father didn't say anything else. He just looked at her, as though weighing the meaning of her words. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Do what you must," he said, his voice clipped. "But remember, there are consequences to every decision." Subin didn't respond. She simply turned and walked out of the office, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders as she stepped into the bright sunlight. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe again. The next few days were a whirlwind. Subin moved forward with her life, slowly but surely. She met with a lawyer, began looking at new places to live, and started the process of untangling herself from the life her father had constructed for her. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. She was finally taking control of her own destiny. And yet, despite the progress she was making, Yun's absence still haunted her. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the man he had been, about the love they had shared, about the way things had fallen apart. She had been so focused on her father's pressure, on the expectations of everyone around her, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. One evening, as Subin sat on the balcony of her new apartment, staring out at the city lights, she received a message. "Can we talk?" It was from Yun. Subin's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She had thought that once he left, he was gone for good. But here he was, reaching out to her. She didn't know what to expect, what to say, or what this conversation would lead to. But one thing was certain: she wasn't the same woman who had married him all those years ago. She had changed. She had grown. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for them. With a deep breath, Subin typed a simple reply: "Yes. Let's talk."